All righty. Good evening, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining us for our workshop for the planning study for the future Clarks Creek Greenway. My name is Bert Lynn. I am the Capital Planning Division Director for Mecklenburg County Park and Recreation. Appreciate you taking your time out of the evening to join us for a summary of the planning project that we are hoping to wrap up here shortly. The study that we'll share tonight will help Park and Recreation identify land required for the future extension of Clarks Creek Greenway to the north and provide us with an estimate of cost for the project. We do not currently have funding to begin construction for the project. However, this study will help us identify the land necessary, which typically is the item that takes the longest, and will set us up nicely to in the future get funding for construction here. Next slide, please. Thank you. Before we get started, I wanted to walk you through some of the features of Zoom. If you aren't familiar with the Zoom, I do recognize a few of the names on the call from some of our previous virtual meetings for our projects and our master plan. We do ask that you stay muted for the majority of the presentation. We will have a time at the end for Q&A, and you can unmute yourself at that point. So if you look in the bottom left corner of your screen, you should have a little microphone shaped button when the red dash is through it. That will let you know that you are muted. We do invite you to turn on your camera if you have that function, and if you're comfortable doing that, that makes this meeting as close to a face-to-face meeting as possible, but you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Also, throughout the presentation tonight, you have an opportunity to ask questions or make comments via the chat function. So it should be in the middle bottom of your screen. There's a little word cloud that says chat. So if you click that chat button at any time, it'll bring up a dialog box and you can type in your message or your question and hit enter. And toward the end of the presentation, we'll go through kind of a Q&A, and we'll look through and answer as many of those questions as we can. Some of those questions we may not have the answer for, and so we'll have our contact information at the end that we can follow up. So let's give the chat a quick test. If you would, let us know your name, your zip code, and your favorite Greenway trail or trail in general here in and around Charlotte. And as you are thinking about your answer there, we'll move on to the next slide. All right, so as I said, my name is Bert Lynn. I'm with Capital Planning for Park and Recreation. I'm also joined tonight by Gwen Cook and Darnika Waters, who are also planners with Capital Planning at Park and Recreation. We're also joined tonight by Jonathan Crowder and Daniel Lambert from Merrick, who served as our design team for the planning study. So with that, we'll get started. Please welcome Gwen Cook.
Good evening. Some people don't know what greenways are, and so it's important to understand the value of greenways and what they do for us. First off, it's an environmental thing. They provide vegetated natural buffers that protect water quality and reduce the impacts of flooding and providing wildlife habitat. They're also linear parks, if you can think of them that way, and they connect people in places, maybe to a park, maybe to a restaurant, many different ways that they connect people to where they need to go and offer that transportation aspect. Trails that provide recreation or transportation, fitness, and economic benefits to all. They promote diversity, health, quality of life, good business, and they stretch our tax dollars. There's a lot of recreation that you have there and transportation for a reasonable amount of tax dollars. Okay, next slide. Greenway trails are the #1 amenity that's requested by our residents. By far more than any other. So we take that to heart when we try to get greenways on the ground just as quickly as we can. The Greenway Master Plan includes more than 308 miles of greenway trails. So we have 60 on the ground right now, and we're headed in that direction. Okay. Next slide. Just to get you oriented as to where we are in discussing this project, the image to your right is obviously in sort of the northeast part of the county. It's north of the university, UNC Charlotte, and it is east of I-77. So the little squiggles that you see in there, the dark squiggles, are Mallard Creek and Clark's Creek. If you look at the image to the left, you see Mallard and Clark's a little bit larger. And you can see in the green dashed line there is our sort of our master plan location of where we think Clark's Creek Greenway will be. And that's what we're studying in much more detail now. Next slide. This is our public input session for the preliminary alignment study for this creek and this greenway extension. The project is not funded and it will not receive capital improvement funds for at least 4 to 5 years, maybe longer. The study has been done to inform where the alignment needs to be and how constructible the future trail is. And we use that for our planning purposes. Okay, we're going to now introduce Jonathan Crowder to you, who will tell us a little bit more detail about this project.
Very good. Thank you, Gwen. Hello to everyone out there this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight for the presentation. Very glad to be able to present some ideas and the work that we've been looking at for a while now. So glad to be here and kind of walk through some of the more specifics of the alignment we've been studying. So first couple of slides, I'll go over some of the big picture, big scale basics, and then we'll drop into more specifics so you can actually see what's going on in the trail and kind of where the alignment looks. So the graphic that you see here, just to orient everybody, Glenn did a good job of kind of fixing this in the area of the county that we are. This is a little bit more zoomed in, so you can kind of see 485 runs through the site. Now, the yellow dashed line here, that's the alignment we're going to be talking about tonight. You see it goes under 485 here and runs all the way over into Brighton, all the way to 115. And it starts way down here in the corner of this plan at Fairlea Drive. So existing greenway ends there, and that's where this yellow dash line kind of picks up and follows Clark Creek for the first segment, and up to 485. Then it kind of goes overland, as we say, and it follows the Duke Power easement, essentially from there, more or less all the way over to 115. So that's what we'll be looking at in a little more detail here. Graphically, what you're looking at, you've got an aerial photo and you see these lighter areas here, and then you've got the darker areas here. For the study, you know, we kind of clipped out these areas that are darker, and that's just part of the graphic that shows that's generally where we think the trail is going to go. So that's kind of where we started. So that's what that is. All the little bubble pullouts that you can kind of see here, those would look a lot better in person. If we could do that, you could walk up to the boards and kind of take a look and see those are actually photographs of specific areas in the trail that were worth noting. So we'll zoom in a little bit in just a few moments, and you can see those a little bit better, but still pretty small on the screen in this type of format. One other graphical thing to pick up here is you see the colors along the creek. And again, this is Clark's Creek here. You've got the purpley color and the blue color and whatnot here. Well, the purple simply represents property currently owned by the county. Okay, so that's what the purple represents. And the bluish layers here, you kind of see those represents floodways and flood zones. So a lot of the property, obviously along the creek, is going to be within those zones. So just a quick couple things about the plan and the exhibits that we're going to look at over the next few slides. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to break this down, this nearly 4-mile run of potential greenway alignment. We'll break that down into 4 sections. The Fairlea to DeArmon. Then we'll go from DeArmon to 485 all the way over to Eastfield. And Eastfield is kind of right here on your plan, just to kind of orient you guys a little bit better. Eastfield right here. So I'll look at those first 2 sections, then I'll pass it off to my colleague, Mr. Daniel Lambert, and he'll talk about section 3 and section 4. Okay, next slide. Okay, before we jump into the corridor, I think it's good to kind of just step back real quick and just mention a couple kind of basic parameters we're looking at when we're trying to establish where Greenway goes. What are you looking for? What are the best opportunities, and what are some of those things you try to avoid? For example, on this image here, you got a picture of just off of Fairlea Drive. This is a power sewer easement. So we're looking for areas that are already cleared, relatively flat grade, obviously much easier to build. So that's one of those areas we're looking at and try to utilize those for the Greenway trails. A second area is obviously if you're on a creek, you know, sometimes you have to cross the creek. So you look for good places to cross the creek. In so doing, you also find those areas that are a little difficult. They're eroding away. So you can note those things as part of your evaluation. Another thing you try to avoid, overly steep slopes. So a lot of these are challenging, but you can mitigate these. But again, big picture concepts, try to avoid those if you can. Also, one thing we're looking at when we're on site and kind of trying to evaluate a corridor is where will trailheads go? How do you get access? You know, where can you locate some facilities like restrooms and maintenance storage areas? All of those kind of things play into how you evaluate a corridor and where you try to locate those things when you're out on site, walking the corridor to figure out where these kind of things go. The last thing I'll mention about this particular slide is the section here, and these are the legend of the map features. I did mention the colors, so the purpley color again represents Meck County owned parcels, and the bluer colors represent floodway and those types of things. On the map, if you see the P, that just stands for the parking area, and the 2 shadow people represent
We seem to have lost Jonathan.
the exhibits. You'll see a dash
Here
line.
you go. Hey, Jonathan.
Yes, sir.
You cut out for just a minute. If you could rewind yourself by about 20 seconds.
Oh my goodness.
I'm sorry. You mentioned you were going through the legend there, and you had talked through the pink colors, and I think you were going through some of the floodway colors there.
Okay, yeah. Sorry about that. We'll try it again. So back to where we were, just mentioning some of the colors so everybody's kind of familiar with the plan. The purpley color we mentioned is Meck County parcels. And then the bluish colors, again, those are floodway, community encroachment zones, and flood zones. If you see circle with a P in it, that's parking options. The silhouette of people, that's restroom option. Blue line, of course, that's the creek. Always good to mention that. And the trail alignment, again, is the dashed yellow line. We also show on the plan some dashed orange lines, and those are potential trail access or other connections that could be considered in the future. Next slide. Okay, first section, Fairlea to DeArmon. In the bottom of the slide, you see down here, that's kind of where the study begins. And this section of the corridor really follows very closely to the creek itself, to Clark's Creek. You see some of the photos on the right-hand side. Nice sewer easement that runs all along the right-hand side or the northern section of Clark's Creek on this plan. So we like to utilize those areas whenever possible. So you'll see that the creek really kind of, and the trail corridor follows right along the creek pretty nicely. And it's good terrain there, so it works pretty well. When we get up to this point, you notice the difference in colors. I noted that the purple color represents county property. Well, you see there's a gap here. There's a gap in the property. And so property owners here, their property goes all the way down to the creek, and they utilize all that property for their backyards. So then you have to make an adjustment. As it turns out, there's a nice location here to cross the creek. So we're showing here in this graphic that you can cross the creek and come along this side of the creek here. It's a little wet, might require some boardwalks, but it can be done. But that's what that represents, is a creek crossing at that location. The trail continues, and you can see the corridor here tightens up quite a bit. And we walk this, it's a little marshy, but you can get through there pretty good, and you just follow along, and then it opens up a lot nicer. It's actually quite pretty, those of you who are familiar with this area. It's quite nice through this section. Once you come up to this location here, you start to kind of turn the corner around this knob in the creek. Man, it gets steep. So we mentioned one of the things we try to avoid is very steep sections. And from here over to DeArmon on this side of the creek is really steep. So that is not a great option. So we, again, try to avoid those areas. So in this case, on the other side of the creek is the continuation of the sewer easement, which we started with down where we came off of Fairlea. So great place to cross the creek in this general location. So we come back across the creek here and follow the existing sewer easement all the way up to DeArmon. And again, the reason you like to use those sewer easements is because they're already cleared of trees. You don't have to cut down trees. Grading is usually minimal. And so it just works very well to put those in places that are already cleared and ready to take a trail. And if any of you guys know this area, it's already very nice now. It's a kind of a walk in the woods. So a nice spot along potential Greenway in this section for sure. So DeArmon Road, most of you guys probably know there are changes coming to DeArmon that are planned. At some point, say the Greenway Trail is in, it will actually go under DeArmon, come out on the other side. And from that point, it transitions a little bit. We've got a different condition after you go across DeArmon. The first section we've described, it really follows the creek well. You've got room to maneuver and works nicely. Transitions a little bit when you cross DeArmon in that your space is a little more constricted. You've got some more grade to pick up. You've got some adjacent properties that are tight to the creek. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll look at that in more detail. So kind of reorient, here's DeArmon on the side. And you also notice here, one of the graphics, we're showing a P with the parking area here and the people. So we've identified that as a potentially good spot for kind of trail access in this part of the system. Potential maintenance opportunity there, restrooms. So seems like that may be a good spot for that sort of thing. So when you see those things on the trail, I just want to point that out. That's what we're referring to as that type of graphic. So back to the trail. So as we come under DeArmon, we're really close to the existing neighborhood. And so the challenge there is a lot of those homes back up real close and real steep to the creek. And the creek in that particular area is kind of a braided stream, number of little pieces of stream that kind of run through there. So looking at the corridor and kind of the best options in a tough spot, we said we should probably go ahead and cross the creek at that location, come back across, make our way in better terrain up to this point. And you see at this point, there's an orange dash line that continues up. So we looked at two options here. One follows the orange dash line up and then back across the creek. The other option crosses the creek right here in the L of the stream, in the dog leg of the stream. Now, the yellow line, it really follows closely within the property of this neighborhood here. It really follows right along the edge of that property, up the creek, and further points north. If you continue on in the orange line, the terrain is a little bit steeper. I think it's manageable. If you can see this picture here, but it's quite attractive. It's all hardwoods, and the creek in this section is also really nice. Lots of little areas that have boulders and outcroppings, so it's quite a nice stretch of the creek. So it'd be great to be able to utilize that and kind of experience that. But really two options there to kind of figure out how that alignment can go there. Two options, but they both converge here just north of this neighborhood. And they really converge in a kind of a wet area. We walked up there and it was almost tip waiter time. It was tough. But we all made it back alive, thankfully. But once you go north of that section on the trail, elevation goes up, it dries out, and you make your way up through the woods all the way to the Duke easement. Here, you get kind of break out of the woods, and there it is. There's 485, and you got a picture of the underpass here on the lower right-hand side. It's interesting. Obviously, under the underpass, not much is growing, but it's a great way to get through there because there's plenty of room to make the trail connection through and under 485 at that point. So once you go under the underpass, you really, at that point, you transition. You transition from following Clark's Creek. Now becomes more of an overland trail following essentially the Duke easement. So once you come out of underneath 485, take a quick left and you're in the Duke easement. And then you really follow that section all the way up to Eastfield Drive, really right through this neighborhood, a number of neighborhood access points right there on White Aspen Place is really the first road connection you come to. And running the trail right through that easement makes a lot of sense. The grade is not bad, and it'll be, I think, a great connection point through that neighborhood. Now, once we get up to Eastfield, you'll notice, again, the parking symbol there. I think there's good opportunity for that at that location. And at that point, you know, we've made it up through the first two sections of the Greenway Trail. It begins to transition a little bit differently from this point over to Brighton. And transition by, I mean, the terrain becomes a lot more substantial as we move towards 115. And any of you guys who know the Brighton area realize that there's lots of topography in that part of the world. And so that becomes challenging, right? It's one of those things you have to work with and kind of work around and figure out when you're planning these types of corridors. So with that, that's the first two options. I'm going to transition to Daniel Lambert, my colleague, and he's going to talk about sections 3 and 4. So Daniel, with that, hand it to you.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. Good evening, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Daniel Lambert. I'm a landscape designer at Merrick and assisted Jonathan in the planning effort here. So this slide brings us to the next major section connecting Eastfield Road out to Everett Keith Road. And at this point, the terrain is still relatively flat and easy, and we're sticking to the existing Duke power easement. There will be 2 road crossings, one at Eastfield Road and then another one at Asbury Chapel Road. Once we get across Asbury Chapel Road, we arrive at the new Bonnie Cone Classical Academy property. And the power easement and a gas easement separates a small triangular area of the property from the rest of the school, which we've identified as a possible trailhead location with some parking, restrooms, and maintenance facility. And just to say again, though we've identified these possible trailhead locations along the alignment, they're presented simply as options here based on favorable site conditions. So a more detailed assessment would need to be conducted if this project is ever funded and then moves forward. But from here, the terrain steepens quite a bit, and we're presented with at least 3 stream crossings at this point. And due to regulations within Duke power easements, stream crossings typically must happen outside of the easement. So the Greenway would need to meander out in a few places to make those crossings actually happen. So also sometime in the future, Hambright Road may be extended through this area. So we're showing that here as a thick gray band, and that would likely result in a Greenway underpass just based on the terrain here. The goal would be to maintain ADA accessibility along the Greenway, which would necessitate some switchbacks and some lengthening of the trail just to make these climbs and descents more manageable. Then once we get out of the steep terrain, it's a bit of a straight shot out to Everett Keith Road along the power easement. And that will bring us to the next slide and our final leg of the alignment, connecting Everett Keith out to Highway 115. Here there may be another trailhead opportunity for consideration on Everett Keith just after we've crossed the road. We would then proceed down the power easement, which gets very steep and actually quite eroded toward the bottom of the slope. However, there is an existing access trail that travels slightly outside of the easement, which we think would make an ideal Greenway alignment because it's already mostly cleared and has a relatively gradual slope. This trail would then exit out onto a sewer easement that follows Cane Creek. I'm going to attempt to put my cursor here on the screen, or a little arrow label, just to kind of show you where I'm at. Does that show up?
Yes. Yeah, I can see the red arrow there.
Okay. So that's where that existing trail exits out onto the sewer easement. And then the sewer easement follows along kind of this orange line out to about this point, at which point you would need to kind of come up the slope here if you were trying to get up to Hambright Road. So we exit out here onto the sewer easement. That sewer easement, as mentioned, it makes for some easy passage. So upstream of this location, there's an existing bridge and a paved access to the Brighton community. That's right here. So as an option, the Greenway could be extended out along that existing sewer easement, then connect to Brighton by way of that bridge. And then it could continue up to Hambright Road, and then even underneath through an existing culvert as part of the future Mooresville-Charlotte Trail. But for the sake of simplicity and then also minimizing the length of the Greenway needed to reach Highway 115, we thought it most appropriate to cross Cane Creek just outside of the power easement. So let's see. Here, the creek is a little bit narrower, a little bit easier to cross, and we don't have to extend a lot of Greenway to get to it. And then we can kind of follow along the power easement at that point, all the way back up to Brighton Parkway. So to the north of this is a section of Greenway that's currently planned to be installed by the developer, which could serve as an access point. We just connect to it with a little spur there. The terrain is still fairly steep and difficult in this area down below Brighton, but we identified a sewer easement which provides some pretty reasonable grades and a clear path up the hill just outside of the power easement. And that is generally located right about here. So this could be followed up a small ridge and then back over into the power easement and then continue out to Brighton Parkway here. And then once we're there, the sidewalk could be followed down to the traffic circle where a dedicated Greenway segment is currently under construction. That's this guy right there. And then that Greenway segment would conclude the current alignment and get us out into the vicinity of Highway 115, where it could then tie into the future Mooresville-Charlotte Trail. And that concludes our walkthrough of the alignment study. And with that, I can hand it back over to Darnika.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darnika Waters, and I'm with Mecklenburg County Park and Rec. I will be introducing a bit more about our Greenway trail features that were discussed earlier by Jonathan and Daniel. This first slide is an example of our typical trailhead. And They may include, our trailheads may include restrooms, parking, maintenance outposts, and small play areas. These pictures are example of existing trailheads that a few of you may recognize. This is an example of a Core 10 bridge, steel bridge. This particular one is over Little Sugar Creek, and is more likely we would use this product or something similar for Clark's Creek. Excuse me, the bridge surface will be to our most recent construction standards of being a concrete trail surface. This here is an example of a Greenway Underpass. This particular one is at Sugar Creek Greenway, Little Sugar Creek Greenway at Archdale Drive. And as you can see, it's a grade separated trail where the pedestrians have a protected condition from the vehicular circulation. Our boardwalks will also be have a concrete surface, and you typically see these for crossing of small stream crossings. This particular image is of Toby Creek Greenway. Here's an example of some of the wayfinding signage you may find at the Greenway. We would have identifying and directional signage for our Greenway users throughout this trail. And with that, I would like to introduce Bert Lynn for questions and answers.
All right, thank you, Darnika. So most of you have already visited our public input page, and we actually had a couple of questions and comments come up about that. Let's see. Somebody asked about when land acquisition or property acquisition might begin for the project. So once we wrap this study up in the next month or so, we will provide a list of properties along this proposed alignment to our county real estate coordinators. They would begin the process or may begin the process next year in contacting property owners individually, giving more information about the project and talking through some of the potential ways that we might be able to acquire that land, whether it's fee simple and the county owns that land outright, or whether it's an easement where the property owner retains ownership of the land but allows the county to utilize the land for recreation purposes. Next was the schedule of the project, and I think Gwen touched on this just a little bit. So we don't currently have money to go in and construct this project. Our funding for projects are typically provided in 5-year increments. We call that our capital improvement plan. We are currently in year 3 of our 5-year plan. And so the next round of funding wouldn't begin until the year 2023. So best case scenario, funding for all or a portion of the section that we looked at tonight would begin in the second half of the year 2023. We had a question regarding the Duke easements. And it's kind of a 2-part question, and so I'll handle it that way. I'll take the first part, and then I'll let Quinn take the second part about landowners. So the first is, are there any issues meeting Duke easement criteria for trails? So the answer to that is no. We have done this successfully in the past, and actually it wasn't until about 5 years ago that Duke Energy allowed us to locate Greenway trails parallel to their transmission lines. What we can't do is build anything above grade or have any major structures within those easements. So any stream crossings that we have to be done with a culvert within the easement that can be crossed by some of the equipment that Duke uses within that area, or larger bridges are typically outside of their easement. Same goes with retaining walls and even signage. So we're a little bit hampered in how we traditionally build a greenway in terms of how we would do it within that easement. So Gwen, there was a question about land ownership within the easement, whether or not the easement area here is made up of individual landowners or if Duke owns the easement there.
Hey, I may have to turn this over to Jonathan, but there are some individual landowners that would need to be approached. We've located the trail where it's most constructible, therefore it would have the least impact. The Duke right-of-way, it does show up on Polaris, if you're familiar with Polaris as a mapping system in Mecklenburg County. And when something shows up on Polaris, it is owned by the entity. I'd say that, and Jonathan, correct me if I'm wrong, because I remember seeing some of that being owned by individual people.
I think that's correct, Gwen. I think that a number of the adjoining properties do still overlap with the Duke easement. And we could pull that section of the plan back up if we could take a look at that in a little more detail.
And that's kind of typical for Duke.
Overlap, I think, between what Duke owns and.
Yeah, that's kind of typical for Duke. They don't like to own a right-of-way if they can help it. They prefer to have an easement on the adjacent properties. We would need to go to those property owners as if Duke wasn't there. So we would need to get our own easement for Greenway. But that's kind of typically what Duke does.
Yep, I believe you're correct, Gwen. All right, let's see. Let me get back to my question sheet. Let's see. Someone was asking for another quick walkthrough of the map and the alignment that we've got right now as we enter into the Brighton community. So that might be, map 4 there. So Daniel, did you want to
Yeah,
share
absolutely.
again kind of how we enter in there? Thank you.
Sure. So I'm not sure which areas you were most interested in. It looks like maybe potential access points into the community. So let me go ahead and put the arrow back on here just so you know what I'm speaking to. So I did mention that you can see this solid yellow line and then the label saying that the greenway is to be constructed by the developer. So that is currently planned and should be installed. I'm not exactly sure where exactly that ties in up north there, but I do know that it comes down to the edge of that property line there. So that would be an obvious potential connection point. This one shown here at the end of, I think that's Chantry Way. It's a little bit hard to read. That's just another possibility since it runs by there. If we could make that connection work, it was just a thought there at the end of the road. There was the potential connection point mentioned here. All of this in yellow is existing. So there's a ramp and walkway down here. There's some stairs that kind of switch back and forth down to a bridge. So because of the stairs, this is not ADA accessible and it wouldn't be an ideal access point for the Greenway from an ADA perspective. That would need to happen somewhere else, but it is an existing constructed access point. So we could connect to that via a dirt way or a little spur. This is the existing sewer easement, so that there's some pretty easy passage through there, and then we could connect over to that bridge if we needed to. So those are the main points, in addition to this point here on Brighton Parkway, where we would kind of exit out onto the sidewalk within that Duke easement. So I'm not sure if that completely answers the question, but those are sort of the access points that we were considering for the Brighton community.
Looks like we might have lost Bert. Let's see what other questions we may have on here.
I think Daniel was going to watch the chat box as well. Daniel, you want to take over?
Sure, I can. I'm looking through here now, trying to see if there's anything we can answer. It may have already been answered, but the underpass of 485, it already exists. There is no trail underneath there. It's all dirt, but there is enough room underneath 485 for a Greenway trail. Maybe not for actually putting a crossing underneath. We didn't suspect that that would be doable. So we show a crossing. I don't know if you want to go back to it, the slide showing 485. I think that was slide 2, portion 2 here. Yes, and Jonathan was kind of talking about this, but we do show here potential crossing outside of the 485 underpass. And you can actually see here on the side, we have some blow up pictures. This is what underneath that I-485 underpass looks like.
And that was achieved in collaboration with NCDOT. They were willing to extend the bridge to the point that the trail could go underneath. That's pretty remarkable, really. So we're pleased with them doing that.
All right, it looks like we have a question here about if there's going to be any creek bank restoration taking place.
That kind of depends on whether or not we need to mitigate for being in the streamside zone or something like that. But also we work often that there's a project going on right now that Stormwater Services is actually our partner, and they're doing stream restoration. They're doing that part. And anyway, so it can work either way. I think I saw that somebody asked if we would do this as a whole, all 4 miles in one project or part of it. We have kind of found that 2 to 3 miles is a big project when you're doing a greenway. And so we don't know, we would decide later how to do it, but chances are pretty good that we'd probably be doing 2 miles and 2 miles or 3 mile and 1 mile. Some combination thereof. And then again, we may decide to do all 4 miles, but that we usually don't do them that long. It's really hard.
And this has already been answered in the chat, but someone asked if the plans are going to be available for download. And the answer is yes. The presentation, a recording, and the overall map will be posted on the public input website for this project.
The most recent question about current issues at the cul-de-sac at Fairlea. I think part of what we would attempt to do here is establish an actual trailhead so that maybe less traffic was directed at the end of that cul-de-sac as, you know, a starting point of that trail, because obviously it can't support a lot of people coming down to that cul-de-sac, parking there and taking the trail. So hopefully some of these parking options that we looked at along this alignment, as those came to fruition, that would alleviate some of the pressure there on Fairlea.
Hey guys, I'm back.
Hello, Bert.
Sorry, my internet connection just dropped. So because I just came back in, I don't have access to the previous chat. So I don't know if we've got any other questions on there or not that we haven't answered already.
Daniel and Darnika were kind of carrying it forward.
Okay, perfect.
Is there anyone brave enough to unmute themselves and ask a question? All voices are welcome.
Yeah, I would like to ask a question specifically about the Fairlea to DeArmon. It looks like there's a section there that is like maybe 2 parcels that have not granted easements. Have those residents been contacted about that section? Because it looks like that's the only one that's left.
No one has been contacted yet. This is the early planning stage, and we'll be considering that. Obviously, we would approach anyone that we needed an easement from or fee simple from. So there's time.
So Linda here from PBAA, but I also live off of Fairlea, and that was one of the questions. We are thankful. Some of the folks put some benches in and some signs up, and if Dina will get on and talk, it actually has helped. And I thank you all for getting that done. But again, you know, the weather's cooling off, so we don't have the activity we did, but once the weather starts up, we will have that issue again. So our hopes is, you know, you build it tomorrow, and I know that's not going to happen, but our hopes is that you do that. And then the decision of putting it through to at least DeArmon, you have that connection of the green, which is in my picture behind me, as a destination area. Is that a good idea? I mean, is that a way to say, come ride the rail and I mean the Greenway and then connect up into the Greenway? I mean the green?
Yeah, so DeArmon would be, even though it would be a fairly short extension of the existing Greenway, it would provide what's missing in this area right now, which is public parking, a place for people to go and gather and park and access the Greenway that don't live kind of within walking or biking distance. And it's also a natural break point to be able to utilize and potentially activate that site and then connect to other destination points. One thing that we avoid doing in our trails is kind of ending it at a point that's just kind of in the middle of the woods. We want to be able to end at a kind of natural break point. And so that could be a trailhead, that could be a park or another destination within the area.
Right, and the fact that you're thinking of maybe putting parking right there in DeArmon would be nice as well. And the only other question I have for you, for those that know the Greenway, one of the main entrances is out of Mallet Creek Elementary, and there is parking there. But for folks that might be a little handicapped, to come down that hill is quite a climb. This year looks like it might not be as bad. Is that true? If it was to have that parking right there in DeArmon?
Yeah, I think we've got a lot more ability here to create a more gentle slope connection down to the Greenway in this location. All right. Any other questions or comments that you'd like to share, either in the chat or unmuted? If not, we'll move on to the next slide. There we go. All right. So for those of you who haven't been able to participate yet, we are kind of rounding the final turn for Meck Playbook, which is our brand new park and recreation master plan. Let's see, we're currently reviewing the master plan document right now internally, and the recommendations and findings from the document will be shared in early 2021. For any information about that project, you can go to the project website. You can see it kind of posted on the bottom of the slide here, meckplaybook.com. And so there you can find links to videos of our previous virtual meetings that we held in June and September. You can also download all the slideshows from all of our previous public engagement sessions and find a little bit more out about the project there. Next slide. And I know we've mentioned before, and we've shared the link in the chat, and we'll probably do that again, to our public input page. This was something that we just started up in August as a way to kind of better share information of our ongoing projects. And it's something that we're going to continue even beyond COVID. Once we get past all of this and we're able to meet in person again, we feel like it's been a really good tool so far to communicate with the residents of Mecklenburg County. So we'll have a video link to tonight's presentation. We'll post that in the next couple of days. We'll also post a PDF of the slides here and a PDF of the maps that might be able to get you a little bit more detail of some of the study area that we've done in here. Also, if you're interested in staying active in all things park and recreation, there's a number of different places where you can go and volunteer and do that. Our Park and Recreation Commission, currently chaired by Peter Ingalls. And we've got, I think, 10 different advisory councils. In this area, we've got the Greenway Advisory Council, and that's chaired by Paul Freestone currently. And Paul was on the call. He may still be on there. I know he was on earlier. Or the North Park Region Advisory Council. And if you're not familiar, our county is divided into 3 park regions, the North, Central, and South. And so Dr. Blanche Penn is the chair of our North Region Advisory Council. And also within the town of Huntersville, if you're on the Huntersville side of the municipal boundary here, they have their own Greenway Trail and Bikeway Commission, overseen by Diane McLean, and I think she was on the meeting as well. So feel free to reach out. I know we've got vacancies on the PRC and on a number of our advisory councils. And I would imagine that Huntersville is always interested in finding people who are passionate about greenways and trails to join them. Next slide, please. So with that, again, thank you so much for joining tonight. Thank you for your great questions. Our contact information is here if you want to give us a call or if you want to send us an email, that'd be great. And then you can continue to look at information and share your thoughts and your questions through our public input page. So unless anybody has any other parting words, thank you so much and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Oh, and happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, Sheree.
Thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you very much.